Hello friends, Miss Jennifer here for Darlington-Art Center, and today I'm going to give you a preview for a brand new class that we're starting at Darlington, Art Around the World. And Art Around the World will be held on Monday afternoons from 4 till 5:15 p.m. and it starts on January 31st. So let's jump right into this. Today's preview is going to be a cast paper tile inspired by Moroccan tiles. And here you can see one of my finished projects. These are really beautiful, hung in a window or in front of a light source. They have a slightly sheer effect and they just take light beautifully. So let's jump right into the supplies. Most of the supplies I already have in front of me. I have these plastic tiles. These tiles are made by Cedar Canyon. I'm gonna go ahead and show you one of their labels just so you can see it. This is the Op Art version, and I'm primarily working with the kaleidoscope version because I feel that those images look the most like the traditional designs in the Moroccan tiles, which tend to be these sort of floral and geometric patterns. So we need the plastic tiles. Of course, you can also do paper casting projects similar to these with other plastic rubbing plates or texture plates if you have those at home. But I really love the global appearance of these tiles. So I have my tiles. I have a watered down Elmer's glue, and I used Elmer's brand, but you can use any school glue or PVA white glue, and this is 50-50. 1 part glue, 1 part water. I have a cup of water in case some of my tissue paper bleeds. You will see that some of my tissue paper will start to stain my brush or stain my glue. I don't want it to stain my glue because then everything will be ruined. So if that happens, I'll just rinse my brush real quick, dry it off, and then I'll be fine. So I have a paper towel to dry, clean water to wash my brush, a paintbrush, and various colors of tissue paper that preferably are not bleeding, but we can work with that if we find it. And that's pretty much all you need. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna take my tile and working in the center design area, I'm gonna go ahead and start filling in some of my glue and water mixture. And it's okay if I get little drips here and there. I am going to go for the actual staying within the lines of the pattern at this point. Sometimes I don't, especially if I am using a lot of the bleeding tissue. I'll just do it abstract and have kind of like a tie-dye effect, but for now I'm gonna see if I can stay within. So I'm going to start with these oranges and reds, and these I'm not going to worry about keeping them in the lines because I'm gonna use this color family in this area. So I'm just slightly overlapping them into the area where I just put the glue. I'm not gonna fill the entire thing just yet. So right now I have that much. And I'm going to take my brush again and I'm going to tap my tissue down into the glue and into the indentations on the texture plate. I really want to get that tissue into those indentations. Okay, now we can see that some of my red is staining my brush already. So I'm going to go ahead and wash my brush and dry it off before I dip it back in my glue. We want to keep the glue pristine. It doesn't matter so much about the tissue paper. And I'm just, so right now, here's my tile. You can see that my tissue is tapped into those grooves pretty well. And I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can get the rest of the space covered so that I only have to wash my brush one more time. That's not because I'm not willing to wash my brush, but you don't want to introduce too much additional water onto the project because we already accounted for water when we made our mixture. And I did tear up my tissue paper pieces fairly small so that I could keep them from going into areas that I don't want them to go into. And I tore, not cut. I tore it rather than cutting it, at least when I wanted to get the smaller pieces, because I think that the fibers in the paper want to interlock more cleanly when they are torn and not cut. So again, I'm going to tap them into the glue mixture. I'm tapping, not brushing, because if you're brushing on tissue, either you can tear it or you can just, it's so delicate and lightweight that you can just wipe it right away and you don't end up getting it pressed into your indentations. You just get kind of a messy clump of paper, and we don't want a messy clump of paper. We want a beautiful tissue tile at the end of this. So I'm tapping down. It's okay if some of the glue squeezes out or gets into other areas, and I'm going to wash my brush again because it is staining it red again, and that's just because of the type of dye that they use in the tissue paper. But I'm going to see if I can avoid that red color for my last few pieces. I'm going to go around the edges and try and fill in this section before moving on to my next color. And like I said, I did tear these pretty small because I want to try and keep it contained, but if you overlap into another area, that's okay. It's just a beautiful, colorful experience. And I'm going to tap those in. And notice I didn't dip my brush back into the glue, even though it was clean. It wasn't because I didn't want to stain the glue. It was because I really wanted to utilize the glue that I initially laid into the tile indentations. I will add more later as needed, but we want it saturated, but we don't want it gloppy. You know, you don't want it oozing out too many places. And I did miss a spot, so I'm going to go ahead and come back to that spot. And I'm going to call that a day. And rinse and dry. Okay, so that's my first section done in reds and oranges. Now my next section is kind of that spiky sort of sunray section. So I'm gonna stay with my warm tones and use yellows. And now this section is tiny also. Oh, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to brush my glue mixture into that area. The section is tiny, but I am going to allow myself to overflow into the previous section. So I'm going to try not to overflow into the next section, which would be where those little circles are. But if I overlap the previous section, the red and orange sun center, that is okay. I'm going to rinse that just in case I got a little bit of orange in there. So let me take some of my yellow pieces, stack them together so I don't have to do this 500,000 times, and tear them into tiny bits. And start layering into that sunburst area. So you can see I'm not really even trying to avoid the center, just trying to avoid coming out of that section. And you know what? If I do, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. And you saw the first one I showed you. There were certainly imperfections in that tile, but it was really fun to make, and I think it had a beautiful end result. Imperfections and all. Gonna go ahead and tap those in just to kind of get an idea how I'm doing. Spin it around and layer in some more. Every once in a while I find a piece that's almost triangular, and that's like, yay, magic. Fits right into that little pointy section there. So you can see once you kind of get the feel of it, it does start to go a little bit faster. Fill in some of those spaces. And I am kind of looking at the empty spaces and deciding which way to orient the paper. So that it comes as close to the edge where I want it to sit as possible. And I'm gonna get a little glue on my brush. Oh, I think I see a spot that's empty. A little bit of glue on my brush and tap the rest of these down and into those crevices. Very happy with that. And now I think I'm going to make these little circles pinks. I'm gonna put my glue in the indentations. And this time I'm not worrying too much if it goes over. I'm just kind of getting it close to the size as I can. I'm going to tap them in. And you can see this is a bleeding color also. And I am going to cover the entire tile in blues. But before I do that, I want to get those corner triangles in purple. Like a warmer purple, if I can find some to kind of go with these warm colors. I want to get these edges in just a tiny bit. That's better. So I'm gonna get my glue. So let me give you a close-up of how we're doing so far. So that's what I have so far. I'm gonna do these edges in purple. Gonna try and tuck them in with my brush. And you can also try using the back of your brush to kind of guide it into the grooves if you want. Or your fingers. But you know, be aware that you might get pink fingers because of some of the tissue is bleeding. All right, so I am overall pretty happy with this layer. So this is basically the first layer. Yes, I left some blank, but that's because I'm gonna cover the whole thing with blue now. So I'm actually going to stack all of these other colors up. I'm not gonna use them again. Because what I'm going to do is just make a thick layer of the blues as kind of a background. So I'm going to add my glue first in the areas that I haven't filled in yet. And again, I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to be too perfect with this. I'm really just kind of letting gravity do its work. And here we go. I'm just going right around the whole thing. I am not going to worry about shades of blue. And at this point, I'm also not worrying about placement. Other than, in other words, I'm gonna go right over the areas I already did. I'm not getting all the way up to the corners yet, but I will do that in the next step. Okay, so now I'm going to tap it down. I'm going to use a little more glue to really push it down into those crevices. So that really is the key to this project, is really getting your tissue into all the nooks and crannies of the texture plate or the texture tile or the rubbing plate or whatever you want to call it. That's how you're going to get a really beautiful design, is by really forcing the paper into all of those indentations. And again, we do that by lightly tapping. If you have to go back over it, it's better to go back over it than to tear it or to move it someplace you don't want it to go. Okay, now I'm going to go all the way to the edges. And at this point, I'm going to go all the way to the edges, and then I'm going to work my way back in. So I'm going to cover the entire tile from the outside edges into the center, and I'm still going to stay with blue. So I want to have a solid background with a multicolored front. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so I'm just going to go right around the edges here. That's my dog Cooper. He doesn't want to be upstairs with his dad, but I guess he doesn't want to be ignored down here anymore either. Unfortunately, it's one or the other. Okay, so I'm going all around the edges, folks. And I am mixing the shades of blue. That is not important to me. But in fact, I actually really like it when it's a sort of mottled or ombre or tie-dye effect. What's important to me is that it's the same color family or tone at this stage. So I'm going to push that down, tapping. And actually, let me show you the difference. So you can see that I really have them loosely laid in, and now I'm going to make them tapped into all of the texture. And you will see some glue spill out or push out when you're tapping it down. That's fine. You'll probably absorb it with your next layer. And I have done this with up to 4 or 5 layers. I'm not going to do that many for the sake of this video, or we'll never get out of here. But the more layers you put on, the stronger it will be. However, you do lose some transparency as you add layers. So really, you just want to think about, do you want this to be more of a light catcher, or do you want it to be more of an opaque tile? If you want more of a light catcher, kind of like a stained glass effect, then really you only want 2 layers, 3 at the most. So I have my outer edge, and now I'm going to fill it into the center. And the reason I'm tossing this around and looking for other colors is I have some like tie-dyed pieces in there, and some pieces of paper towel that I don't want to use. So I'm trying to just use the regular tissue paper. And I'm going ahead and going all the way to the center this time. And tap that down. And then I'll show you how it looks when it's all tapped into the crevices. And you do want to work your way around, especially we know that that center area is bleeding, and we don't necessarily want to get that red dye on our brush before we're done doing the blue and purple area. Which I have to say, even from the back, is looking super beautiful and vibrant right now. And now I'm going to add a little bit of glue to get the center area completed. It's not quite as absorbent as I would have thought it would be. Okay. Give you a close-up of that. I feel like I missed a spot, but I think that's because I used just the really, really light blue. So here's what we look like, all pushed into the crevices. And now folks, if I was just doing this for myself, I would add a 3rd layer, but for the sake of this video, I am not going to, but I will show you one that I did last night. So here's the one I showed you already that's finished. Here's one that I worked on last night, and I believe this is 3 layers. I did a solid background. I did ombre underneath. Let's see what it looks like. So to remove it, I'm just going to carefully start to peel it away. And you don't want to force it. You just kind of want to let it gradually pop out. You see it comes out pretty easily. And there we go. There's my ombre green spiral. I'm pretty happy with that too. So that is it for today. Just an example of the type of project we might do in Art Around the World, coming to Darlington on Mondays starting January 31st. Hope to see you there. Bye-bye.